Hello everyone, I'm just popping by today because I thought I might do today's daily stitching kind of live as it happens, just so that you can see how you might go about starting something when you haven't really got any clear idea of what you want to do with it. And I promise you I have no idea what I'm going to do here. This is today's, it's the 11th of December 2025, so it's this little block here. It's very small. And I'm looking at what's gone before, so this is December from here. And because it's December, I've gone mainly with sort of wintry colours so far. I'm going mainly with greys and browns, some blues, some dull greens, some dull terracotta here. So I'm thinking probably more greyish something here, I don't know. So I'm just going to have a look through my grey threads, which are these. And these are threads that I dye myself. I sell them in my online shop on Big Cartel. And I wind them from skeins onto little paper tubes, which just keeps them a bit neater. So I keep all my textured yarns and threads in here, because what I like to do is outline the block, just to give the edge a bit of definition. And you can see I've done that on most of these. So I'm looking in here for something that would probably coordinate with what I've already got down in this sort of area. And I'm thinking maybe, I've just picked that out at random. And I think actually that might work. So if you don't have textured yarns like these, these are silk boucle. That one's a cotton boucle yarn. I sell both of those kinds of yarn in my shop. But you can use these are bits of, yarn oddments from, I think that came from a charity shop. That's a bit that was left over from some knitting. So, you can, if you cast around, you can usually find oddments of yarn somewhere that would be suitable. So I'm going to start by couching some of that around the edge, and I need something to couch it with. And that's just laying conveniently right on the top, and I think that would probably do. Okay, so I've just threaded a needle with some of this thinner thread. This is silk pearl 12 thread. It's quite fine. It's a little bit like maybe one strand of DMC stranded floss, if you're familiar with that. It's a size 9 quilter's needle. And then this silk boucle yarn is made up of, if you pull it apart at the end, you can see it's made up of 2 or 3, in this case 2 I think, plies, and possibly 3, of different threads that are sort of spun together, but they're spun unevenly, which gives it this bumpy texture. So if you kind of split it a bit at the ends and sort of tease these ends out, excuse me while I just lick my fingers. If we just trim that off so it's all the same length, we can probably get it to go through the eye of a big chenille needle. A chenille needle is like a tapestry needle, but it's got a sharper point. So if we can just tease it through there, we can. Then what we can do is just send it down there. We pull the other side. It won't go through the hole because the yarn is too thick, but you can sort of tease that end out. Pull that back through. I'm just going to hold that down on the other side, and then I'm going to take this needle here, and sometimes, to avoid too many knots on the back, sometimes I use a waist knot method, but without a knot. So what you can do is just come along this line where you're going to couch the thicker thread, just with a few back stitches, and then you can cut that right off there. And you've got a fairly neat starting point where you haven't got any knots or loose ends. I'm going to just hold this other end along the line, and with any luck we might just whip it down on the other side. If we can do that right. So I'm just going to work some little over stitches across this boucle yarn. All very simple. See how we're doing on the back. Kind of. It's kind of working. Just need to catch that end down a little bit better. And we're just going to carry on following the outline of this little box. Just turn that around so we can see what we're doing. You can see I don't use a frame or a hoop, I just have it supported on a tabletop and it's fine. You can hold the fabric in your hand and you can just make sure that you're not pulling your stitches too tight. And the tension actually works out just fine. So I'm going to carry on doing this and I'll show you what happens at the end when we get back to that corner. Okay, we're nearly up at the point where we started, so I'm just going to cut this boucle yarn about there. I don't know what that is, an inch or two. I'm going to tease out the ends like we did before. Just snip that so that they're all roughly level. And then with any luck we can coax them through this needle. And we can just send that back down through that same hole. There we go. And you get a nice neat corner there. So there's no sort of bumpy yarn where you've made a knot in it or anything like that. So send that down through that corner. And then we'll have a look at the other side. And it turns out that end didn't catch itself down, so it doesn't matter. Just going to run a little overcast stitch on the other side just to catch those two ends. And then we can just wrap the thread around the needle to make a little knot and just weave that end in, so we can snip that off there, and that's okay. And then we need to think about how we're going to fill that box. By the time we've got to this point in the year, and you can see there's hardly anything left. This is the last of 12 months of stitching, so there's nothing wrong with scrolling back through previous work to kind of inspire yourself. So you can look at some of the stitches you've done earlier. This looks like it was spring and summer because of the colour palette. And again, it's all very simple stitches. And there's nothing wrong with repeating stitches through the year. Nobody will notice. I quite often do banks of straight stitches like these. And I quite often do little detached cross stitches. And that's a set of zigzags, which I did quite recently actually. There we go. So I repeated that one without knowing it. But it's fine. You know, there's only a finite number of patterns, probably. I don't know. I don't know if it's finite or infinite. But you can just scroll back and look at, see if anything grabs your imagination to inspire you to what you're going to do today. I'm not sure that I am particularly inspired by any of that, but let's choose a colour and see what happens. So let's get my threads back again. for something sort of similar to that, probably. And I quite like that. Oh, quite like that. That one's quite similar to the colours in the boucle. I think we might go with that one. And that is another silk pearl 12. Probably my favourite thread. It's really easy to stitch with. Once you've stitched with silk, you won't want to stitch with anything else. I'm just going to thread this needle and then we'll start something. Okay, I've just threaded this needle. It's the same needle, size 9 quilter's needle. I'm just going to come to the back here and start the thread off somewhere. I haven't got a knot in this one. I'm just going to do a couple of little stitches and that'll hold it. You can see it's really secure. There's no knot there. I'm just going to snip that off. So I've randomly decided to start there. I don't know, not by design, just by accident. And I think what I'm going to do is, and I have no idea really what I'm doing here. I'm going to do a bit of kind of self-couching, which means just bringing your thread right across the fabric. You have to be really careful with the tension here if you're not using a frame, because it's very easy to pull that too tight and it's very easy to have it too loose. And if it is too loose, you can just stitch a gentle curve into it. And I'm just holding that long float down with some very small stitches. That's all that's happening there. Let's come up again and do that again. And the distance between lines is entirely optional. You can get very different looking effects by just varying that distance, actually. So if you did your stripes really close together, it would look quite different from having some space between them. And it would look different again in a different colour and different again in a thicker or thinner thread. So you can quite often do the same sort of stitch at different scales, in different threads, in different colours, and make it look quite different. This one I'm going to bring it up a little bit, because why not? And I still have no plan. I don't know what I'm going to do after this. And I find that once you've done this a few times, you don't need a plan. You just, just trust the thing and go with whatever happens, which is probably what most of us do every day. Ow, that was my finger. Okay, so that's a few lines there. Now what we could do next is, can you see that? Yes, there it is. We could do some more lines coming across. We could do some other stitch in between these lines. I think what I might do is some coming the other way. So I'm just going to skip straight down to there. Just going to do a little back stitch so it doesn't pull from back up there. Now we have to turn this upside down. This way. And same again. enough there to do another line? Probably not. I'm just going to finish this thread off and start a new one. Little back stitch there. A couple of times around the needle. And just run it underneath some of the stitches. Just get another needle full. Okay, all that's happened there is I've done exactly the same as I did the first time, just started that off on the back with a couple of small stitches. So I'm just going to carry on coming along here, and I'm varying the angle of these lines a little bit. And just catching that thread down with some little stitches. Nothing too difficult there, is there? And there's probably the last line here. So that's probably about there. Okay, nice. Now I've got a lot of thread left, so I could keep going. And I've got lots of choices again. I could do a little cross or something, or a knot in the space. I could do a little cross or some other thing in the intersection. I could do the same as this in a different colour in the spaces. So I would have a two-tone sort of plaid effect. If you can imagine that in a contrasting colour. And again, this is, you know, a few ways to make a very simple pattern look different. I'm going to do, oops, little crosses, I think. Let me do that again, because I've brought that unnecessarily up there. I could just start there, couldn't I? Right, let's try that again. So we need to be up about there. About there. So let's just do a little diagonal stitch across that intersection. And then we come back down the row like that. And the same on the other side. Next row rather. Column, not row. You know what I mean, you can see it. And then back down again. And those are very easy. I really like the colours in this thread. Sort of a greenish grey and a sort of mustardy gold. But of course you can use any colour you like, really. I really like winter. I like winter colours. I like the colour palette of winter. I like the quality of the light. you know, if you don't like winter, you could deliberately choose bright colours to, you know, to make it feel a bit lighter and brighter. Personally, I like darkness. I like darkness and gloom. There we go. That's nicely brought us probably to the useful end of that thread. And I think that will do. If we look at it in context with the rest of the days, I think it doesn't look out of place. And there we are. I'm just going to finish this thread off under here. And I don't know how long that took altogether, but I mean, it's not that long. It's about as long as it takes you to sit down with a cup of tea, I guess. And, you know, we need to make time for these things, I think. You can't be on the go all day long. You need to just stop and reflect for at least a few minutes. There we are. That's the 11th of December 2025.